Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you a loyal son of DePauw, John McWethy.
It's, of course, a risk to bring graduates back because we do know a lot about this university. From the perspective of a parent looking out at you, you are 500 miracles, truly. God danced the day you were born, and now 21 or 22 years later, I am sure he is dancing again. You may not remember the specifics of this day, but you are being transformed as you sit here. Yesterday you were a student. Today, by the time you leave, you will be a graduate. Really nice. How many of you remember your first day here at DePauw? Oh yeah. It was another of those transforming days. I certainly remember mine. It was scorching hot, and my parents brought me here to a convocation right on this lawn. I remember it vividly. I was nervous, and my father insisted that we had to come up and meet the college president personally. It was mortifying. I was appalled. Then he insisted that we had to go look up my new advisor, faculty advisor, and meet that person. I was further appalled and wanted to dig a hole. I was so nervous and upset as we continued this procession of having to meet all the faculty that finally my mother, God bless mothers who intervene in these situations, said, let's go back to the motel. Maybe you can take a shower and calm down a little bit, cool off, because it was so hot. And I jumped in the shower, and I slipped and fell and grabbed the shower curtain, tore the bar off the wall. All the plaster came tumbling down on top of me. I banged my head, cut my knee, and I finally said to my parents, please leave. And I was launched. I was a college freshman, totally lost. Now, my memory of graduation 4 years later is a little less clear. I do remember again that it was hot, something that sometimes happens here in central Indiana. And all I wanted to do, I remember, was get out of here just as fast as I could. But first I had to listen to some gray-haired white guy talk about how lucky I was and all of the great things that lay ahead of me. Well, I was lucky, of course, and I knew it. And the truth is, probably the best days of my life were ahead of me. Given my academic record, that was not too hard to achieve. And as President Bottoms has already said, perhaps the only person happier to see me leave here than my own parents may have been the university president at that time, because of the editorials I wrote in the college newspaper. What I needed from a graduation speaker was something a little different, maybe a little lighter. That helped to shape my thinking about what I was going to say to you today. If I offered you a whole lot of profound thoughts, my thought was 30 minutes after leaving here, you probably would have forgotten it. But my hope is 20 years from now, when your children ask you, what was graduation like? You might be able to quickly remember, well, I laughed and I was happy. That'll be my goal. So in the spirit of this profoundly important day of passage, I offer you 9 important lessons that you can sink your teeth into. Number 1, never trust your dog to guard your lunch. These are important. Number 2, and here is one for those of you who are math challenged. You do not need to balance your checkbook, but you do occasionally need to check your balance. It will be very important. Number 3, and this is for those of you who take over-the-counter drugs. Never take a laxative and a sleeping pill at the same time. Number 4, Never confuse your career with your life. And it's just like a parent to slip in the real message in between all of the levity here. We'll come back to that. Never hold a cat and try to use a dustbuster at the same time. Floss your teeth. You may not care about your teeth now, but when they start to fall out, trust me, you will. Do not lick steak knives. Stretch every morning and meditate. Now, I never did this, but it sounds like such a good idea that I'm sure you'll be a better person if you do. And finally, and this is one for just the men in the audience, when a woman you love asks, "How does my hair look?" the answer must always be, "It looks terrific, and you better sound like you mean it." Now, this brings us to the subject of honesty. And those little things called white lies. Little white lies. Not that you have ever encountered any of them here at DePauw. You remember your course descriptions? You remember what they told you during rush? It's part of our culture. The best operational definition for little white lies that I ever heard of came from the mother of former President Jimmy Carter. This was a formidable woman named Miss Lillian, and by anyone's standards, she was a tough nut, and she was always defending her son. Now, a female reporter who had repeatedly asked to have an interview with Miss Lillian finally was granted that interview and was asking her questions. Well, did the president, when he was a young man, ever lie? And Miss Lillian said, well, he may have said a few little white lies. And this reporter, sensing that she was onto something, a big scoop here, said, well, what do you mean by little white lies? And Miss Lillian held a very thin smile, and she looked at this female reporter, and she said, little white lies, dear? Well, you remember when you first came into the room and I told you how glad I was to see you? And how I told you how slim you looked? She was a woman who spoke her mind. That is what I hope all of you will do. Another formidable woman, Eleanor Roosevelt, bucked society in Washington. She was a bit too opinionated for the people in Washington, and she stood right up to those who criticized her. And at a White House function, she is quoted as saying, if you don't have something nice to say about people, come over here and sit next to me. So about this journey you're about to take, the journey called the rest of your life. Whatever you do, make a difference. You don't have to win a Nobel Peace Prize to have an impact. Try small acts of kindness, shovel a neighbor's walk without being asked, paint a room in your church, work an evening in a soup kitchen or a homeless shelter. Have something positive to say to someone around you, even though you may not be feeling very positive. If you help someone else, you will help yourself. It is so simple. It is not what you say, but what you do that makes a difference in your relationships, in your job, and in your life. And about your job, it's all right to have a passion for your work. In fact, it's wonderful. But separate your job from your life, because many of our jobs are very, very consuming. Learn to tell the difference. Ask yourself the question, if I am sick or if I die, is my boss going to care, or are the people who love me going to care? That's how the dividing line is, in case, of course, your boss and the person that loves you is the same person. So what relevance could any of the classes that you have taken have to where you are now headed? You cannot imagine how relevant the building blocks of knowledge and experience that you have gained here will prove one day in your life. From what you have learned in DePauw in these wonderful small classrooms, you may not have learned the answers, but you certainly have learned how to ask the questions. Years after you have left Greencastle, I predict that something a professor has said to you will suddenly flash back in your mind and ring so true and so wise And if the professor was occasionally wrong, I suggest you email that professor and let him know. Not in my wildest dreams did I think my European history course would provide the baseline of knowledge that I would need when I stood in Moscow watching the Soviet Union collapse, changing the political landscape in the world for decades. How could I have known that a comparative religion course would provide me with a foundation to better understand what was happening in what was then Yugoslavia between the Serbs, the Croats, and the Muslims, who seemed to hate each other with such passion? I never would have imagined that my African history course would provide any leavening whatsoever when I first stepped off a plane in Mogadishu, Somalia. It was hot and dusty, and within minutes there was gunfire. Not for the first time in my life, I asked, what am I doing here? Same question occurred to me a couple of weeks ago in Baghdad when I was with Secretary Rumsfeld. He was in an armored personnel carrier, and it turned out that there was some gunfire, and we, the members of the press, were in a bus. Big windows, and we were sort of like a shooting gallery up there, but I always imagine the headlines, motorcade that Rumsfeld is in comes under fire, and incidentally in the fine print, 10 reporters are killed in the process. I must admit that no class at DePauw prepared me for the first-hand view that I would get of the ravages of war, the 24 wars that I have covered in the last 20 to 25 years. No journalist can adequately describe the sobering moments of coming face to face with the horrors of such conflict. No class prepared me for that day on September 11th, when an American Airlines passenger plane slammed into the side of the Pentagon down the hall from where I was working. When I was here at DePauw, I protested against the war in Vietnam. Something seemed so wrong to me as a student. Without knowing it at the time, it turned out our government was lying to us. How could I have known that I would spend most of my working life covering this country's wars and trying to understand what makes people go to war, asking questions of our government every time we headed towards conflict? In college, I learned to ask the question, why? Why was this university run the way it was? Do you know that women, when I was here at DePauw, had hours and they had to begin at 11 o'clock? On weekends, 12:30. The word why is, in my view, the most powerful word in the English language. It is the driving force of my profession, and it's also the driving force and at the heart of your professors, of creative sciences, of honest politicians, and of good parents. Don't stop asking the word why just because you leave DePauw. All institutions, all endeavors, all relationships are improved by a good scrubbing using the word why. In democracy, it is the question we must all constantly be asking our government and our leaders. It is not unpatriotic to question the government. It is unpatriotic not to. And just when things seem to be so serious, it's always important to find just a little bit of humor. Humor is the salve for pain, it's the relief from fear, and it's a spiritual vitamin pill. Humor is a moment of relief that almost rivals sex. But it's much less complicated, and you can do it in public. I distinctly remember being under fire in the mountains above Sarajevo in what used to be Yugoslavia. My wife's name is Lori, and I buried my face in the mud, and I thought, oh God, Lori is going to kill me if I get killed here. And I said it out loud, and I started laughing, and the guy who had his face buried in the mud right next to me thought I was nuts, but it got me through the moment. There is nothing like humor. Every time I leave this country, it makes me appreciate what we have here, our democracy, our free press, and our peace. After all, where else do people order a double cheeseburger and order fries with a Diet Coke? Where else can an ambulance arrive? Where else does a pizza arrive at your house faster than an ambulance? Little story about my wife going to kill me brings me to relationships. Some of you will marry and some of you will not. I hope all of you will have a chance to love. Nothing that I have achieved in my life is a greater accomplishment, but I was lucky I married a CPA. For those of you who are English majors, she does the taxes, I do the dishes, I do the laundry, something to look forward to. College definitely did not prepare me for this woman, though I did meet her here on this campus 2 days before I graduated. So maybe that started for several of you, I don't know. On our first date, we walked out to the quarry. Does the quarry still exist? It's pretty romantic. What a romantic night that was. I taught her how to spit for distance. People often ask, what do you do at DePauw in Greencastle for fun? I tell them we have shucking bees, we have tractor pulls, we have races on stilts over covered bridges, but you really have to duck. And my wife can honestly say I learned how to spit for distance. I can't imagine any course that could have prepared me for children, but that's another story, and many of you will discover this yourselves. Probably many of you are sitting out there today saying, not me, I'm not having kids. Yeah, right. We'll see about that. A word about your families. Some of you are part of a long DePauw tradition, and this has been your collegiate home for decades. And other families are watching the first person in their family graduate from any college. Many of your parents are no doubt astonished that you have made it to this point. To you, the bill payers, to you, the supporters, and the people who have been at the other end of all those long-distance phone calls, I offer my applause, and graduates, so should you, for your parents. And to the remarkable faculty here at DePauw, the men and women who have helped to teach you and challenge you and at times become your wonderful friends, congratulations to you too. Well done. And to you graduates, finally, when you come up here to get your diploma, pay attention. You can trip and fall. I know, I did it. Some of the people with whom you're sitting today you will never see again, and you will probably be glad of that. Some will become your dearest friends until the day you die. You will have made connections here that will live and grow. You will marvel at how your friendships that began on this campus will last and grow over the decades. That may be DePauw's greatest gift to you, the people. And I leave you with one closing thought from a humorist named Art Buchwald, who many of you may not know, who had his tongue firmly planted in his cheek. We are leaving you with a perfect world. Don't screw it up. Thank you.